All right, Lynda Steele, we're talking about being a political orphan, federally speaking. Boy, we've talked about this a ton, and sidebar, off the air, it's an ongoing discussion you and I have it pretty much every time we drive into the station.
I know, and you see the polls that are coming out. There was one that just came out, Angus Reid poll, showing that the Conservatives are now climbing a bit on the Liberals. And interestingly, young people are more inclined to say that they would vote Conservative. Between 18 and I think the number was 34, and I think it's because, if I have to guess, it's because Poilievre has been smart about choosing his sort of kitchen table issue as being the economy.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are feeling the stress and the pressure, and they're tired of the fighting and the Chinese interference obsession, and it does make me feel like, oh my gosh, if there actually was a federal election in the next 6 months or so, I don't know who I would vote for.
I hope those people being polled are just missing out on the kids that are really worried about their future when it comes to climate change and what we've talked about already on the show, wildfires and so much more than that. If you don't know your politics, boy, do we have a guest who can help you with that. In fact, he has written a book that is a question mark. It is called Too Dumb for Democracy? David Moscrop is one of the brilliant minds when it comes to explaining the political landscape both here and abroad, and he joins us in studio. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
My pleasure. It's nice to be back on the West Coast.
Yeah, where it's not so hot, a little bit hot, and we have worries about forest fires and climate change is front and center again for a lot of people, although interestingly on the poll, it's down below economy and healthcare and what have you, and maybe that's right. But can we talk about Justin Trudeau now? So it's been 8 years since he's been the Prime Minister.
Pierre Poilievre keeps telling us that.
Yeah, well, and for
8 years.
Any politician, that's getting long in the tooth.
True.
People are getting sick of him, and he just seems to keep sticking his feet into issues like the no national inquiry on the Chinese interference. Do you think that he is really going to stick around and fight another election?
Oh yeah, he's sticking around. And if he wasn't going to, by now you'd know it, because this is when you want to do that transition. If you wait too long, you get hammered. In fact, think of the 1990s when Brian Mulroney, fairly late in the game, sort of looked at the numbers and said, well, I'm out, and left Kim Campbell to clean up the mess. 2 seats the Progressive Conservatives ended up with. So if he was going, you would know by now. But he's going to try to do something that has only been ever done twice in Canadian history, which is win 4 in a row.
Yeah, but do you think he's a little bit tone deaf? I mean, it seems like my problem, I think, with him, and I do believe that he's done some good things, his government has done some good things, but it feels like he's disconnected from the average person. Doesn't understand what the ethics issues, that the optics of, going to the Aga Khan's Island, or the We charity connections, or the Chinese interference, bringing in David Johnston. It feels like he digs in his heels and goes, I'm right, you're all wrong.
Oh, he definitely does. And I'm going to do something I don't do often. I'm going to give Doug Ford a little bit of credit. Famously not a big fan of Doug Ford right here, Premier of Ontario. But Ford has a little bit of shame where he'll say, oops, I was wrong. I'm going to change my mind.
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, a lot less so, even in the context of a minority parliament, which is not a great way to govern. And over time, that eats away at people's confidence in you. They get irritated, they get sick of you, and they just want someone else. And governments age like milk left out in the sun, right? They age fast. You end up accumulating a lot of baggage, and then, as we say, governments defeat themselves, right? They stay too long at the fair. This one's pushing the boundaries of that. But the Trudeau calculation is, well, I'm the best person to beat Pierre Poilievre. No one else can do it. I'm going to be the one to do it because Poilievre is too big a risk, and no one else can get the job done, so it's got to be me.
So let's talk a little bit about that for Conservatives who are watching, or for federal Liberal voters who might be watching, or NDP as well. But really, this feels like the two-horse race.
Yeah, it's always a two-horse race.
Always a two-horse race. So when you're looking at Pierre Poilievre, despite or with those polling numbers in mind, the fact that he is grabbing headlines, right? He's saying the things, but without a whole lot of policy attached to the things. He's a very good opposition, right? So have you parsed any of his policies away from any of the things that he said, like actual things he will do, as opposed to just pointing out what's wrong with the other?
I don't know what he's going to do. I mean, he won't do the wacky stuff. They're going to back off he's already backed off the Bitcoin stuff. Remember the Bitcoin stuff?
I do remember the Bitcoin.
And then he won. He was like, "What Bitcoin? Never met her." But that was how you win in a leadership race.
Yeah.
But it's very different once you have to govern and try to govern the entire country win the entire country.
Yeah.
So he's going to go back to bread and butter. We're going to cut taxes, which people like to hear.
Yeah.
We're going to cut spending. They like to hear that less when you start talking about what you're going to cut. We're going to get inflation under control, and we're going to repeal the carbon tax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's this. He probably will cut the carbon tax if he wins. Beyond that, he will cut some state program if he wins. Beyond that, I don't know how much he's actually going to do that he says he's going to do right now. And it's typical Canadian politics to promise a bunch of stuff and then back off when you realize, well, you can't really keep that promise. The federal Liberals in electoral reform, the Chrétien Liberals in the GST back in the day. You just win, and you're like, oh, the reality is very different than it is in my head.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But he's in tough because the Liberals, cynically, have what we call an efficient vote, which just means you can win an election with fewer votes than your opponent because your votes are in the right place. Because in this country, the popular vote doesn't matter. It's where it is because you got to win seats. And in the last two federal elections, 2019, 2021, the federal Liberals won with fewer votes than the Conservatives, both times. Prior to that, it had only happened 2 times in all of Canadian history.
Wow.
Happened to Pierre Trudeau, by the way, who lost to Joe Clark with 500,000 more votes.
Yeah.
Now it's happened twice in a row. And the Liberals know they can hit this postal code, they can hit this neighborhood, because the Conservative vote is concentrated kind of in the prairies. They're not doing so well in Ontario. And the Liberals are banking on that. That's how cynical this politics is in this country.
With Poilievre in the beginning, I was kind of excited because he's chippy and, pugnacious, and I thought this will be fun. He's smart. He's been around the block.
Albertan.
Comments along.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Yeah. Sure.
But then he got in and he's a little too chippy, and everything is negative, and his little Twitter videos and what have you. I don't like the negativity.
The stoking.
It does feel like, there's too much anger and hostility. But the person who's really ticking me off is Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, because I get that they feel that their power is in forcing the Trudeau government to push toward things that they want, like the National Dental Program, which the provinces administer healthcare, and so this is now some sort of weird thing where you don't even really need bills, you just get the money, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best way to do it. But Jagmeet Singh is that cry wolf, and we need a public inquiry, and but never prepared to pull the trigger to get rid of his agreement, what did they call it, the confidence agreement?
Supply and confidence.
So what do you make of his performance?
I mean, he's a bit of a stuffed shirt, and for a long time, I was among those who were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And when he was doing TikTok videos during the last election and NDP partisans were saying, no, this is how you get the youth vote, my response was, I don't believe you. I don't think that's true, but maybe I'll be wrong. So go ahead and prove me wrong. And then,
you were right.
Lo and behold, of course it didn't. Young people don't vote. And they're not going to vote because you're, in a shower doing a TikTok video. It's super cringe, first of all, but also it's just not effective.
Yeah.
And so the NDP people tell you, well, we push the Liberals on pharmacare, we push the Liberals on dental care, we push them on child care, we push them on pandemic benefits, and without us, you wouldn't have any of this good stuff. And I would rate that a kind of C+, B-, because that's true probably for some of this stuff. But I remember talking to people around pandemic supports and said, how much did the NDP really have an effect on what the Liberals did? And they said, we didn't have time to listen to the NDP. We had to shovel billions of dollars out the door in a week. Like, here's $100 billion. You got a week to figure out what you're going to do with it. Like, we weren't calling up the Jagmeet Singh to ask him how to spend it.
Right.
So I think they've been weak on that. Probably did have some effect on dental care. But the Liberals were going to do some of this stuff anyway.
Can I ask you about that? You mentioned COVID-19 and coming through the pandemic, and how an average Joe Canadian voter might look at how a Conservative government on a provincial level might have handled the pandemic versus how an NDP government here in British Columbia might have handled it, or federally how the federal government did manage things, whether some people are super pissed off that so much money did get shoveled out the door. Where do you think the flavor is, in your political opinion, for how the pandemic leaves each of the 3 federal parties and then maybe a word or two on the provincial, because we're seeing Danielle Smith in Alberta. Did you see that coming? There's three questions in there.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when Jason Kenney resigned. I mean, I felt a little bit bad for him because he had been caught trying to be reasonable and conservative and managing the crazies in his caucus and his province, of which there are many. And it was caught in the middle trying to do both. So he was being a bit of a liberal. He was trying to drive the center line. Here's what happens when you drive the center line too long. You get hit. You run into oncoming traffic, and there you go. And that's what happened to Kenney. And then I thought, there was a lot of fist pumping. He got what he deserved. I was like, okay, but
look at what you have now.
Look who's coming up the road. It's not better. It's so much worse. I don't think people are really thinking about the pandemic anymore in terms of vote intention. They might be thinking of some of the things that the pandemic has conditioned: inflation and affordability, healthcare, education.
Is there blame with those things federally then? Do you think?
I mean, that's what Poilievre's going to try to say. Well, the Trudeau government is responsible for the inflation crisis because they spent too much money, which I would rate mostly baloney. That has something to do with it, but there's a lot going on there. And so, they're going to try to make that stick, or, X, Y, or Z is responsible for wait times but that had nothing to do with the pandemic. We were in a healthcare crisis long before the pandemic. I think when the next election comes along, it's going to have nothing to do with the pandemic. It's only kind of incidentally through inflation maybe, but it's going to be about, how do you fix wait times in hospitals? How can we afford a home? You can't, you never will. How do we, get prices down so we can afford groceries? It'll be about that stuff. People aren't going to be looking back 2 or 3 years.
Prediction? If there's an election next year, 2025?
I love it.
I try not to do predictions, sort of for the same way I'm not meant to bet on sports anymore because I lose.
Yeah, me too.
But I would say if you're betting, even though the projections have the Conservatives slightly ahead, you give a slight edge to the Liberals in a minority government because they have a more efficient vote.
Right.
Oh, great. Oh, that didn't sound
That's
optimistic.
Groundhog Day.
Here we go.
It's Groundhog Day.
You're going to have to meet us back here in
Proportional
September.
representation.
I would love to come back.
Meet us back here in September.
Yeah, just outside of fire season would be nice.
Yes, please.
We'll get you down here when it's not so smoky out.
David Moscrop, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
That was fun.
That was fun. I'm sorry about the 3 questions in one. I want to pick his brain.
I know.
Pick. But we can read his book. Too Dumb for Democracy is David Moscrop's book. It's awesome. You can read him in the Washington Post and the Globe and Mail. He's got his Substack, TVO. He's got it all. He's doing it all. You got to follow him on social media as well. He takes no prisoners, as it were. What's coming up on the show?
Well, up next, if you're hitting thrift stores in search of a bargain this summer, well, buyer beware, that deal may not be as good as it looks. We're going to explain when we come back.
And we've also got to talk about our fans. Our viewing party is in effect. Lori, thank you.
Hello.
Thank you so much.
We
for
also
watching.
have Mary and Nanaimo sent us a photo. We love seeing the photos, so make sure that you show us. She said this was in the recliner. I think you can see the feet
just
poking
kicking back. And Cherie and Poco, thank you for tuning in. And if you want to be a part of our viewing party, hit us up on Twitter or Instagram or send us an email. You will find us right here.
And we'll be right back.